What's up, guys? This is Rob at the Legacy Den. This is a channel about Magic the Gathering in Japan, specifically in Osaka. So the Den part of the Legacy Den name comes from an area in Osaka called Denden Town. It's similar to Akihabara in Tokyo, so there's a large amount of anime stores, video game stores, electronic stores, and there's a very, very large amount of card stores here. For example, for Magic the Gathering singles alone, there's over 15 different stores that sell them in about a 2-block radius. And it seems like there's new stores opening up each year. This includes a small store on the 9th floor of a pretty shady apartment building run by Magic the Gathering pro player Ryuichi Tamada. But this doesn't include stores that are outside of this 2-block radius, even if they're not really that far away. So, due to the high density of stores in such a small area, it's pretty much the prime location for people in Osaka to not only go to tournaments for Magic the Gathering, but to get your shopping done in the most cost-efficient manner. When there's this many stores, you can check prices at one store, leave, go to a different store, 5 minutes walking away, on the other side, and then work your way back. And by the time you work your way back and go around all the stores, you can find the cheapest price for whatever you're looking for. So having lived here for a few years, I've noticed the economy of Magic the Gathering in Japan is quite different from in the States. I follow Magic Finance in order to make sure I get the best deals for what I'm looking for. So there's a lot of differences here I've noticed, and I want to use this channel to talk about these differences from the perspective of an American. So I'll just start with talking about Magic the Gathering in Japan in general. So one of the reasons why there's so many card stores in Denden Town is because there's so many different card games that are played. The two main other popular card games are Yu-Gi-Oh! And Weiss Schwarz. Yu-Gi-Oh! You guys all know, and Weiss Schwarz is an anime card game. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. It is played in America a bit, but it's definitely not as popular as it is here in Japan. There's hundreds of series, I think, that are part of this card game, and when you can play your favorite cards from your favorite anime against your friends, obviously it's going to get popular. The game is subject to power creep, but it's not as bad as some of the other card games that came and died out. So some of those other card games that are a little less popular here are Chaos, Duel Masters, Pokemon, Crusade, Precious Memories, Lychee, Wycross, the Final Fantasy card game, the Monster Collection card game, and there's probably others I've missed. But because of how many different games are popular here, there's a lot of different stores to support all that demand. So because there's so many different stores, this means there's going to be competitive prices. But because of the high population density here in Osaka, it does lead to inflated prices on high demand cards. So that's why the economy is a bit more strange than it is in America. So another thing to note is, as you guys know, Japan is also smaller than the US, Canada, or Australia. It's about the size of California. Because of this, the amount of stores are all condensed to one small area. And yeah, there are some card stores in other parts of the city, but usually the tournaments that people show up at are in this Denden Town area, because that's where everyone is going to go for their shopping. And so it makes it easy for stores to hold tournaments and for people to show up on random weeknights. There's Legacy played almost every day of the week at some store in this area. And while there might not always be a lot of people joining, the fact that they're still holding tournaments every week for it says something. So because of the large player base in a small area, Standard, Modern, and Legacy thrive here. Frontier just started, so it's kind of hard to tell how well it's doing. And while I do have a Frontier deck, I don't go to Frontier tournaments. I've never been to one, so I don't know how the attendance looks. From what I've seen, it's not too high though. But for any of the main 3 formats, you can probably find a tournament where other people are playing. Due to the vast majority of Japanese people being working class, a lot of people are really able to actually afford decent decks. So almost everyone who plays Modern at these tournaments has all the cards that they need for their deck. people generally don't run budget options very often, especially in Legacy. There's not too many people who join Legacy tournaments with decks that are just home brews or complete budget options using shocks instead of duels, for example. So almost any time you come, you can actually have decent competition, but there are a lot of the same people that consistently show up to the tournaments, of course. However, this means that formats like EDH and booster drafts are vastly underrepresented. Of course, there's people who show up to pre-releases, but sealed and booster drafts events aren't really held very often, and even when they are held, they don't have high attendance. I'm not sure why, but for some reason, it could just be the cost of doing it is expensive every week. It could also be the lack of price support from stores, but I'll talk about that in another video. As for EDH, the reason EDH isn't played very much in Japan is because people don't really play casual formats at other people's houses. While I'm sure a lot of you watching this go to card stores to play EDH, I'm sure a huge, probably vast majority, a lot of your EDH games are played at home or at your friend's home. Someone's house is where EDH games are played. People grab some drinks, they just hang out with their friends on one night a week, and everyone plays EDH. Of course, people go to card stores to play EDH too, but in Japan, the amount of people who play casually at someone's home is close to none. Not only are Japanese houses much smaller, some people live in what they call shoeboxes, which are just a one room, there's a bed, maybe a mini fridge, sink, toilet, but not much else. So there's definitely no space to have guests over, much less more than what's needed to play a multiplayer EDH game. So going over to someone's house too is also a big deal in this country. If you've never been to someone else's house before, you're supposed to bring souvenirs for that person. So it's kind of daunting to most people to go over to someone's house. And a lot of Japanese people actually still live with their parents. It's not really seen as too much of a taboo to live with your parents, even well into your 30s in this country. So there are a lot of people that don't even have their own place. They go home and they're at their parents' house, and it's not too easy if their house isn't too big to have more than one person over to play games of Magic. So because of this, EDH just isn't played very often. Sometimes people play at card stores, of course, but because people don't play as much in general, the amount of people who go to card stores to play EDH are also less than the number of people in the States who play. So there are sometimes EDH events here, though. Friday nights, sometimes after Modern or after Legacy tournaments, they'll have EDH, and you can join in pods of 3 or 4. I've never joined one because I don't play EDH seriously, as in I don't play to win tournaments. I obviously play and have a deck to win with, but I don't really want to join a tournament for EDH. I feel like part of the fun is casually sitting there with your friends, but that's just my own opinion. There's nothing wrong with EDH tournaments. But if I was to do one, I would prefer a one-on-one style, and they do it in multiplayer here, and I don't like the multiplayer aspect in a tournament, personally. Another thing about MTG in Japan is that it's not as ubiquitous or mainstream as in the States. In America, most people at least know what it is, or they can tell you, oh yeah, Magic? Yeah, that's a card game. And a lot of people that I've talked to have said, oh yeah, Magic, I played that when I was a kid, or oh yeah, I tried that. But in Japan, people don't really know what it is outside of the people who play card games and play Magic, or they just know someone who plays Magic. But it's not really as big of a thing here. There's not a ton of childhood players that played with their friends because, you know, when people were kids here, they played like Yu-Gi-Oh! And they played, you know, Japanese card games. They didn't really play the one from America. And of course, it wasn't until maybe 4th edition, Black Bordered, or Chronicles maybe, that MTG even came to Japan. So it was already, you know, a couple years after the States. So because most people can't tell you what it is, that doesn't give as many people the whole nostalgia thing. And a lot of the people who play EDH also are the nostalgia players. Oh, I don't really want to play super seriously, but I remember playing as a kid and using this cool dragon card, so I'm going to build a dragon EDH deck. There's not really players like that here, at least and definitely not in the numbers that there are in the States. So this leads to the economy in Japan being so much different than the US. That means far less copies of modern and legacy staples exist in the US than in Japan. And this means that the price of casual cards are generally lower in Japan than in the US. So I'll name a few cards as an example. Let's look at Gaia's Cradle. So at the time of this video, it's about $210 TCG mid. In Denden Town, you can easily find copies for, I'm just going to use dollar values here to make it easier. And I'm going to say 100 yen is $1 because as far as the value of the yen goes, when you're paid in yen, that's about how much it's worth. I like to use the McDonald's dollar menu reference. The dollar menu is the 100 yen menu here. So it's about the same. I know the exchange rate is definitely in the dollar's favor right now. But as for this video and for all the purposes of finance, because the value of yen versus dollar changes, I'm just going to do everything in 100 yen to $1. I'll try to say things in dollars. If I say things in yen, just subtract 2 zeros. Okay, so let's look at Gaia's Cradle. It's about $210 mid, and in Denden Town, there's copies for about $150 to $160 near mint. And if you go to a place where they sell cards that are damaged or they have a slight nick on them, they can bump the price down. And I've found them even this month as low as about $110, and that's including tax. So if you don't mind one that's a little beat up, then you can get one for half the price that a near mint one costs in the States. And yes, it's a 4 of an Elves, and Elves is a legacy format that where the cards are generally more expensive here, but it's a lot of the value of it does actually come from EDH, and because of there's not as many EDH players here, the price on Gaia's Cradle isn't nearly as high. Let's look at another casual card, Selvala, Heart of the Wild. So this card, it was just printed in Conspiracy 2. It's hovering at around $11, and it sees absolutely zero constructed play format. There's not a single legacy deck that's running that card, I'm pretty sure. And definitely not in Vintage. It's not legal in Modern or Standard. So, because the demand for this card is practically 100% casual driven, copies of it are selling for only about $4 or so. It used to be $3, but all the people who would send their cards to the States using buy lists were buying all the $3 copies. So the price really only increased from that, I think. But in Japanese, you can easily find copies for $4 or $3. But casual cards in Japanese don't actually sell very well in the States. Casual players like their cards in English. A lot of people don't know all the cards, so if they have a card they can't read, it really doesn't make them want to play that card. And if their friends are like, why are you playing a card that none of us can read? It just creates bad blood. And people try to avoid that by just sticking with cards in English. So cards like Selvala in Japanese I consider pretty worthless, but an English one is worth quite a bit. So that's the difference there. So let's look at some opposite examples. Fulminator Mage, Modern Masters 2015. At the time of the video, it's about $17.50 TCG mid. In Japan, the normal price for this is no less than $20, I would say. And that's if you're really, really lucky, or maybe you find one that's lightly played. And the reason is it's played as a 4 of in Modern sideboards. So because it's 100% constructed driven, the price is more. And there was actually a long time when Modern Masters cards, despite Modern Masters 2015 being released, weren't really dropping in price. Like Vendilion Cliques only recently dropped below $40. You can maybe find them for about $35 now if you're, if you look, but it took it way longer than it did in the States to reach that price, just because, again, most of Vendilion Clique's demand comes from constructed formats, both modern and legacy. So another example, Lion's Eye Diamond. So this card is about 130 TCG mid, but there's no way you're going to find it for that price here unless you want one that's, damaged, MP, HP. Because this card is also from an age when Magic wasn't very big in Japan, there's very few Mirage copies of LED floating around. And it's a 4-of in Storm, which is a really popular deck in Japan for some reason. Japanese people love the complicated legacy decks, so the demand is really high. And the normal price I see for one is about $170 for a near mint copy here. So, and Japanese copies of LED, because Mirage was actually printed in Japanese, go for even more. So it's the opposite of Selvala, where the Japanese card is actually worth more because it's more rare than the English card. While for Selvala, the Japanese card is practically worth nothing because casual players in the States don't want a Japanese copy of that card, and Japanese players don't really want it because it's a casual card. So that's just a few of the differences. I could probably spend hours talking about other single card differences, but I think you guys get the idea. So again, the demand for constructed format playables is very high, and the demand for casual format playables is much lower. So this leads to inflated card prices for cards with low supply like dual lands or archetype-specific cards. And it generally leads to a lower price for mostly casual cards. That's all for this video. And you can find me on Twitter at Osaka Legacy Den. I post pictures of my latest pickups at some prices that I think are pretty unbelievable. And I also talk about Magic in general, so come check it out, Osaka Legacy Den. Thanks again.